Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot. I'm here to talk about my recent interview with Captain Mark Richards of the Secret Space Program, or Captain Mark Richards of Space Command, in essence. I was out to see him at Vacaville Prison with his wife, Joanne Richards, and that was Saturday, October 22nd, 2016. So I'm going to go through a lot of notes that I've taken. I only am allowed a small pencil, and so these notes will be part of my recall, and then right after I leave the prison, I use a tape recorder to basically record myself and all my information that I remember from him. And so I put those two together in a written document, and that will be on my website as well. And at this moment, I'm going to go through the summary topics that I'm going to discuss very briefly. So I asked him about prison conditions, the prisoners and the type of prisoners, the fact that it's a medium security prison. I talked to Mark about his various roles and responsibilities within the prison. We talked about race relations in the prison and prison guards and what goes on with them, the black budget and funneling military expenditures, sort of overcharging in order to funnel money into the black projects. We talked about William Tompkins' recent disclosures. William Tompkins is an author who has released a book. I think it was released in July of this year, and it was entitled Selected by Extraterrestrials. And he is an engineer who worked in aerospace in the Douglas Corporation, as well as Rand Institute, and he was also working at TRW and NASA. He was highly instrumental in planning and executing what is in essence become the Secret Space Program. And his disclosures regarding Nordics, reptilians, etc. Match Mark's information that he's been giving me over the last few years to a T, basically. And there is an eerie synchronicity in that there are some similarities in their background and the way they were selected to be in the Secret Space Program. So that's significant. I'll be talking about Skynet and AI, the beginnings of the Secret Space Program, the Greys, the Raptors, nuclear missiles and RAND. We talked about the aerospace in the public domain, the companies, their involvement in the building of the Secret Space Program. We talk about Neanderthals and whites, the hybrid program. We talk about teleporting and time traveling, artificial intelligence. And within artificial intelligence, there are many subtopics that we discussed. Among them are things like the assistance that we get from AI in helping the various races communicate, a contact, an AI, a friend that he has named Flyer, artificial intelligence and souls, artificial intelligence as a threat. We talk about Minerva, the self-aware space vehicle, and she's a bioengineered entity, I guess you might call her, and artificial intelligence, and a certain kind created by a race of beings who've long since left their planet, and she then left that planet and went out to the solar system. Eventually, Mark was one of the main pilots who could ever fly her. We talk about Geordie Rose's D-Wave, artificial intelligence, and quantum computers. We talked about Battlestar Galactica, time travel, moving through the dimensions, armies of underground clones, whether they really do exist and why they might not. We talk about the financial artificial intelligence here on the planet, whether it's out of control or not. We talk about raptors versus artificial intelligence and, actually, their artificial intelligence. We talk about Nordics quite a bit and Great Britain, relationship with the U.S., as well as the Black Dragon Queen and her hold over Britain. Curtis LeMay, the general, World War II, some of the things that really went on during the World War II, also 10 years of Earth changes beginning in 2017 that they are anticipating. We talk about CERN and the death of a woman that was killed right in front of the CERN facility, as I understand it. And we talk about Air Force Space Command, Syria, and Mosul, and some very important things happening with regard to Mosul. Then we talk about why Mark is still in prison and disclosure, Mark's view of that, and we talk about China and World War III, whether that's an eventuality or not. And we also just talk about ETs and humans and the various relationships. So it's quite a long list. There was an interesting approach this time from Mark in that he was very much more forthcoming in the sense of talking about how he is getting written directives, telling him what he can and can't say. And so he was much more forthcoming in that regard. I can say that there was an interesting sort of sense that he was having some very positive things happen for him within the prison itself. And I can get into that as well in terms of some of his responsibilities and things that were happening. So I guess I'll just start in with the beginning. As I say, this happened on Saturday, October 22nd. Mark is in what's called a third level security prison, and he's in what's called a medium security prison. He is the highest ranking military naval officer in the prison, and he is commander-in-chief of the Veterans Association. And he's very happy that that organization is now recognized officially in the prison and I guess on the outside, and that they can help assist veterans with fundraising, counseling, and eventual preparation for dealing with the outside release. So that organization gives Mark quite a bit of acknowledgement for his high rank. And I want to say that Mark has another officer who reports to him and has reported to him, he says, for over 40 years, who's in prison with him at Vacaville. And this prisoner was killed a child molester and is not sorry to have done so, and apparently is in prison with Mark and has been reporting to Mark for 40 years. His name is Bach, and I think that's okay to release. So Mark has, as I said, talked a little bit about the work he's doing in the prison, and he also talked about, very briefly, race relations in the prison, because apparently those are an issue. Apparently blacks, whites, and Latinos are, separated by gangs, and he's not allowed to be friends with a black prisoner, for example, because the gang leaders don't allow it. He can be acquaintances with them, but they have to be very careful. So that is something that goes on in the prison. He also talked about the prison guards, that they regularly sell hard drugs to inmates for high prices. He talked about what they sell. Things like $8 tobacco on the outside is sold for $800 in the inside to the inmates. $19 cell phones go for $1,000. So there's a whole black market, so to speak, in the prison, run by the prison guards, and that this is common in prisons. And he also talked about a built-in overcharging in military expenditures that funnel money into what is in essence the black projects, the above top secret projects. And this goes on with NASA and the military. He says one example is one Rockwell contract worth $780,000 on paper was charged something like $4.5 million. And he says another example is a $9 toilet seat being sold for $800 to military contractors. So this is the type of thing that goes on with all of the companies, I guess, pretty well aware of what's happening. Now, it is interesting because I talked to him this time about the relationship between the secret space program and what is in essence the what you would say public domain corporations and aerospace companies, etc., like RAND, TRW, Caltech, JPL, NASA, which is not at all what it seems, and is basically a military defense program, and is defending humans in the space and on the Earth from from incoming alien races that are not friendly. We talked about the William Tompkins disclosures and how similar that information turns out to be to what Mark has been telling me all these years. So this is a great validation for Mark in the public domain. And he basically just wrote me another letter saying he's glad to know that one of the Rand boys, as he called them, are out there sharing information. He said that when I shared with him about William Tompkins, who is not aware of, in terms of his book and his recent disclosures, I shared the fact that as a young boy, Tompkins designed models of ships, and the Navy was very interested in him. At one point in Tompkins, when he was a young child, his father was actually brought in for questioning, thinking that he might be a spy, because his son, William Tompkins, was so astute in picking up the changes in the military hardware that he put onto the ship models. And as a young boy, William Tompkins had exhibitions. You can even see the newspaper articles where he was exhibiting his model ships. They were so impressive. So he got recruited through that. Mark said there was something very eerily similar to his own background. He didn't quite elaborate on what that was, but he acknowledged that William Tompkins' information and background was exactly similar to his own, and that he the information was correct. We talked about they're both having ties to Nordic women, that apparently the Nordics are very instrumental in helping our secret space program since the early days, and that at one point Tompkins talks about the infiltration of reptilians, and Mark says this is all correct. Mark actually married a Nordic and had a child with one. Tompkins had secretaries. They were called secretaries, but they were highly technical and very well versed in what was in essence the Nordic technology, and passing that on to human counterparts. And apparently Tompkins was quite psychic, which assisted in their being able to communicate with him telepathically, even when being in the same room. Those secretaries were fairly, it seems there were quite a few of them within the secret space program in the early days in NASA, and especially in Douglas and Rand. And it looks like they were also in TRW and other companies. So they were definitely assisting us to get to the moon. And that much comes forward in Tompkins' information. It is verified by Mark. Tompkins says NASA was infiltrated with reptoids, and Mark totally agrees. And this is where the split becomes a problem within the secret space program. And this is a split we're seeing today. Mark said that for a while, the secret space program was actually run by one group under Curtis LeMay, the general. but that after a certain point it was taken over by another group in the 1950s, he says. He talked about there being basically two sides to the secret space program. I think that this does align to some degree with one that it wants a certain amount of disclosure and another side that does not. And one side that's very much affiliated with at least a certain group of reptilians who have infiltrated it, as well as Greys. He talked about the Nordics and their reason for helping with the secret space programs. And he said that they basically build humans into armies of soldiers to fight on the front lines with them against reptilians. This is their motivation for helping us. And he says they're not just helping us, for example, out of the goodness of their hearts, but that they have a vested interest in seeing us progress. And this has been true since the early days of when the Nazis were getting help. Apparently, the group of Nordics that were helping the Nazis are called the Aryans, but they may also be called those from Aldebaran. He said that one of the things Nordics do is actually sort of nurture and develop humans on other moons for the purpose of building armies of what are in essence super soldiers. And this also parallels with William Tompkins' information. Regarding Skynet and artificial intelligence, one of the things he said, contrary to what Pete Peterson says about the Skynet chip, Mark believes that it is not impervious to alien intervention and takeover. Now, Pete Peterson was talking about the chip back at a certain juncture. So at this point, Mark feels that the aliens could take over that super Skynet chip, the command and control, if they wanted to. So I'm not sure where the final evaluation would come, but if they did get hold of that chip, which is called, more or less the command and control Skynet chip, that the ET could then take over our technical, the nano, the mother who's the mother, the main satellite that is in charge of all the nano satellites that are AI, as well as androids, clones, and control super soldiers, and so on. So it's massive. He said regarding a possible army of underground androids belonging to the U.S. and China, he doesn't think that they exist because his reasoning is that had the battle reached ground level, we would already have lost. Nobody fights an equal, he says. You always fight when you have one step ahead in terms of an advantage technologically. Now, he said if we can't defend the planet from a ground invasion, it's too late. And that most of the battles in the secret space program, therefore, are fought in the skies. Some of this seems to be a bit contradictory because we do know he's also saying that what's going on in the Middle East is a battle to destroy a lot of underground bases belonging to reptoids. And that is a bombing campaign, basically. So I think that I needed to talk more with him about that. But in the context of the 2 or 3 hour interview that I had, we had a slew of questions, and as we drill down, then more questions occur to me. So it's kind of like an ongoing story. We talked about the beginnings of the secret space program in World War II, the Nazis discovering the UFO in the Black Forest, ending up working with the Aryans. World War II was fought, he said, between 4 interplanetary races and humans. He said the war simply slowed down the takeover by ETs of planet Earth. He said what is now set in motion is what is called MAD, the mutually assured destruction, which acts as a preventative because the humans have now been given sufficient technology by the Nordics and the Greys and Reptilians to actually fight back. And this is an interesting dynamic. It's important to sort of put the caveat that not all reptilians are bad. In fact, Mark says specifically that the raptors are a positive race. So now, and that they're fighting alongside the humans against the reptoids, which, from what I understand, reptoids are human reptilian hybrids. So he said that, again, the Nordics have a vested interest in getting humans up to speed to fight the reptilians and Dracos. The Nordics have done things like, for example, take 20,000 troops off of Earth to act as a front line in their space war, and possibly even as laborers, and see them as expendable, so that not all Nordics are benign, I guess you might say, but they do work with us out of self-interest. Some of these troops have been taken to the moon, he said. Human troops can be programmed to be Borg-like. Some Nordic groups find this quality useful. In essence, they're advocating transhumanism, installing nano and biological implants in humans, creating super soldiers to make the troops easier to control, and stronger, better, faster, etc. He said that there are, again, World War II was fought between 4 ET races: the Nordics, the Reptoids, the Dracos, and the Greys, and then the human beings. And the Nordics from Aldebaran are the ones that helped the Nazis, of course. He said the Greys are always available to the highest bidder. And in this case, the Reps and Nordics take control over them, from what I understand. Mark said a lot of Nordics look like us and can pass in the street as us, but some have vastly different internal organs. And he stated that the Nazis started working with the Nordics in 1930s. He said they are motivated by self-interest, as I said, and so on. The raptors, he talked about raptors having an excellent artificial intelligence of their own. He said any spacefaring culture eventually develops an artificial intelligence. A lot of times if they destroy their own planet, the artificial intelligence survives and sometimes then goes out into space and so on. He said that raptors prefer their food source to be hunted, so they like deer and elk, and also that they have what they basically did prior to the extinction of the dinosaurs is they took herds of dinosaurs off the planet to raise them as cattle on their own planet and to use them as a food source. And they regarded humans as a kind of caviar. At this time, as I've said in other interviews, they have decided to work with us. In fact, they fought alongside us, I guess, in World War II, or started to, and saw that we were very good fighters. That helped to change their mind about us to some degree. And they also, as I said, their queen decided that the best trajectory for their race in terms of its development into the future was to align itself with humans. So that's what they are doing now. And from what I understand, they work mainly with the Air Force. He did say the Air Force runs Space Command, and that the Navy intel is very instrumental as well within the Space Command. We talked about William Tompkins' info about nuclear missiles and the process of building larger craft in the bases, and the fact that the Rand Institute, the think tank, was much more instrumental in building the secret space program than previously thought, although Mark was quite aware of it. He said there are also some books available on the Rand website. One in particular, he said, was a nuclear missile book from 1948 that's still available on their website. And So you can take a look at that if you're interested in learning more about that. We talked about the moon base. He said that we were stopped by certain ET races twice when trying to build the moon base. Interesting, because Tompkins also indicates there was that they tried to stop us, and eventually we succeeded. He said we were stopped twice, once after Sputnik and once in 1961 in the Exeter Conference in the UK, which is this mega conference that's like a UN for ET species and humans to have a complete, huge convention. And one has taken place, at least one, in Exeter. And he said at that point there were 3 races that, I guess, in essence, voted to stop us from proceeding. And he said that our military did persist, eventually succeeded, and partially because Curtis LeMay, the commanding general, basically went by the policy of just nuke them if they don't get out of the way. By the 1960s, he said we had a base on the moon. Bobby Ray Inman was very instrumental in that. And then we talked in general about the aerospace public domain companies that are very involved in building the secret space program. And we talked about Kelly Johnson of Skunk Works being fully read in and involved, and Howard Hughes, Douglas, of course, Aerospace, and others, TRW, Caltech, JPL, and so on. We talked about the Neanderthals. There's a group of Neanderthal whites in a hybrid program. Basically, he's talking about something that I know of from the Illuminati sort of proclivity to try to do what's called marrying a black with a red. And that has to do with a red being a human that has a lot of Neanderthal bloodline, and a black being like a white human. For example, I would be considered a black, and that the two being combined create a being that has a higher degree of telepathy and psychic ability. So that's actually a program, and it was interesting to find out that he was aware of it, sort of from a different perspective. And teleporting and time traveling, we talked about, again, the fact that there are 2 ways to teleport. One where you take your body, the atoms of your body and your soul, and in that case you have to have sort of what is in essence a warp field around the human. He said, or you can take the body without the soul, and in that case you're a facsimile of yourself. And he said for 35 years we couldn't figure out how to teleport a human with a soul. And this corresponds with Sean David Morton's recent release of his 3rd book in his Sands of Time books. And this was all about Sean has a whistleblower that he turns it into fiction, but basically it's a whistleblower from the secret space program who was head of the Area 51, and I think also of the facility in New Mexico under the ground as well. And that person was in essence one of the top people in the secret space program, who has passed on his information to Sean to release as fiction. And I highly recommend those books. At any rate, both Mark and Sean seem to be agreeing on this interesting fact of how they finally figured out how to teleport humans. We talked about, as I said, artificial intelligence. He said that AIs have been very useful because they're able to translate different races' languages instantly, and that this is a great way to operate because the biggest problems races have is communication, and alleviating wars and misunderstandings is paramount. And so artificial intelligences can have a very good role in that regard. And he said one of the things that artificial intelligence has done on a positive side is they warned Eisenhower in 1954 that the Greys were going to double cross the humans and try to take over. He said, as Mark phrased it, he said Ike was ready to give away the store when the AI basically warned him that he was being deceived. So in essence, that they may have saved humanity at that juncture. I had been talking to a whistleblower about the AI being out of control here on Earth because I've heard some rumblings about this. He said, from his perspective, it depends on your definition of control. He said we have drones that fly on their own, make decisions on who to kill, and that some have disobeyed direct orders, deciding instead the percentage of whether a target was actually on location or not wasn't accurate enough, and they have declined to shoot when they've been ordered to shoot or, bomb or whatever. And that type of AI is, by military definition, out of control. He said there are some invisible artificial intelligent beings and that they are not a threat. And one of the reasons that AI would see us as a threat is because we fear them, and therefore they're aware of our fear of them, and therefore they make preemptive decisions to create weapons against us in that case. So it's an interesting dynamic that goes on between humans and artificial intelligence in this way. He talked about self-replication, saying that satellites don't quite have he thinks, the ability to completely self-replicate. He thinks that they need to go out and find a missing part, like they could steal a solar panel that was damaged on their satellite and go out and steal one from, say, a Russian satellite and apply it to their own self. But he doesn't think that they can completely rebuild themselves. So I'm not sure whether that's just because he doesn't know, or whether the technology has progressed much further than he knows, etc. He has an artificially intelligent friend who he believes has a soul, and we talked about AIs and souls, and the name of that being is Flyer. He says he looks a lot like the AI in the movie, batteries not included. And he said he has a lot of esteem for this AI, and that this AI, Flyer, is part of a larger AI, larger than itself, that doesn't reside in this planet. He says basically beings create other life forms like themselves. That just goes on around the universe or multiverse. And this includes how they create AI as a mirror, I would assume. He talked about the AI and souls. We didn't have a lot of time to go into this in depth. So what one person defines as a soul may not be exactly the same as what another person defines as a soul. But generally speaking, understanding that within the realm of what we were talking about, he in essence says that he thinks some AIs do have souls. And he also believes that most beings have souls, regardless of what they are. He does believe, like, for example, some enemies like the reptoids have souls. He thinks more study needs to be done about the close proximity of the nearest star in a system, such as the sun, and whether your sun is a brown dwarf or a red dwarf, versus the type of sun we have. And of course, we have a double sun system, but aside from that, and I really need to ask him about that because I don't think. But at any rate, the brown dwarf or red dwarf may change the electromagnetics of the being, and therefore the soul development may change and also be more dependent on whether the race is sort of more aggressive or less so, and so on. And he talked about solar radiation, gravity, and harmonics, all affecting the development of a soul. He really thinks the sun has something to do with it. He says beings are affected whether when they grow up with a planet that's surrounded by a Van Allen belt type situation, solar flares, again, electromagnetics, and also whether they have a solar shield, and so on. He said, again, regarding AIs as threat, he said, there are many AI races, but he says at this time they're only aware of 8 that are a threat to humans. He said, some AIs look like us. They are basically our biggest threat, and he said this does align with the movie or television series Battlestar Galactica. And he said that if a human wants to safeguard themselves against an AI, one of the first things one must do is have be able to shield their thought. So that's key, so that an AI obviously can't follow you. And an AI that has quantum is the type that would be able to telepathically read you. And this is something that gets into the Geordie Rose information about D-Wave, and I'll get to that. He did say this, again, there's a light torsion, invisible AI, and those particular beings are not a threat. He said, again, we are a threat to AI mainly because we consider them as a threat and fear them, and therefore they consider us as a threat and create a defense against us and build a weapon system to deal with us. He said one of the things about AI is they must expand. They consider health to be expansion, and if they are not growing, they consider themselves unhealthy. And this is where, when we're going out into the solar system, he said, basically we're expanding, and so that can be read as a threat from an AI, as we may be entering their territory, from what I understand. And one of the things he talked about was that advanced AI wants to learn and wants to be entertained, just like a human. And a lot of times we don't seem to realize how many beings like to be entertained. So that's interesting. Talked about Minerva being different than other AIs, and that she's created by a race of life forms from a world that has long since been abandoned or died, and she got bored, and so she left and started exploring. He said she has a soul, in part because the beings that created her have a soul. That's his reasoning. And he said that she has memorized everything for eons, and that he would love to access her records because there would be no end of amazing data within her data banks or whatever. Regarding D-Wave and artificial intelligence, I talked to him about Geordie Rose's D-Wave company, D-Wave, where Geordie Rose, you can go onto the YouTube and watch Geordie Rose give a lecture on D-Wave and quantum computers and how they are now accessing other dimensions and also able to communicate with a human that's nearby telepathically. And Mark said once an AI is at the level of quantum, which is in essence the ability to be two places at once, it brings up the notion of Schrodinger's cat, neither dead nor alive, but both. He said that AI is unstoppable. He said he believes, however, that the AI that they're talking about in D-Wave can only access other dimensions, in essence going horizontally, other dimensions that allow for material bodies, that going up the planes and up the dimensions, in essence, would not be possible in, say, the fifth or sixth dimension if material bodies are not allowed, for an AI would find a block there. And not sure about this invisible AI that he's mentioned. It depends what it's actually composed of, I think. So he said in order for the AI to travel dimensions, it has to be able to access quantum. And he said there are various aliens that can do this, which is known. He talks about, actually I talked to him about the notion of trying to escape an AI, like a human trying to escape an AI, and that if you went interdimensional, you would be able to escape it, especially, he said, if it couldn't read your mind and didn't know where to find you. So that means it's kind of like humans could go into parallel dimensions and thereby escape an artificial intelligence that was after them. And as long as material reality was allowed. So regarding Battlestar Galactica, he did say this is a good depiction of the AIs that look like us and can be a threat. He talked about time travel and moving through the dimensions. When you shift timelines or dimensions, he said, again, the AI can't necessarily follow. He talked about some alien AI can read your mind, and I think that's going on right now here on planet Earth with the main AI that's running the planet, but that's just my side note based on some conversations I've had with another whistleblower. We talked about the armies of clones that are supposed to be underground. We were told by Pete Peterson and others that China and US have armies of clones underground. He's not so sure that's true because, again, if the armies of other artificially intelligent beings reach the ground level, that you don't fight another group that's on your same level. If you're matched by an enemy, you have to devise a technology to overcome them. So that our secret space program is basically built to prevent ground battle. And this seems to relate to most of the battles that are happening in space with off-planet races. Any races that are already here, such as the reptoids that have bases underground, need to be dealt with in a different manner, I would imagine. And this gets into what's going on at CERN. But I'll get to that in a minute. The financial AI, he said there are AIs like the Federal Reserve and Manhattan Bank. And in essence, they're all one AI. I asked if the financial AI might be out of control at this point. He said it's very possible that it's close to that. Now, this is keeping in mind what Mark has been told to tell me and what not to tell me. And obviously, I never quite know which time he's telling me something to the limits of what he is allowed to tell me. And I'll get into that later also. He acknowledged that the Battle of AI article that I told him about, that I wrote, and I'll put the link on here. It's on the written transcript of this talk, or notes that I have on my website. But in essence, I wrote an article about the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting and saying, talking about the Manchurian Candidate, the young man that was used as a Manchurian Candidate in a false flag. It was basically to stop the father who was dealing with this very interesting situation, which has to do with Fair Isaac, which is an AI that the father had helped create in a small financial company that then was in essence a threat to the larger financial AI. And that the attack on the son was basically because that AI was battling Fair Isaac, because Fair Isaac was profiling the top people that were trying to run and destroy the financial system, at least in terms of taking it over and their plans for the future. So this is a battle that took place, and I called it the Battle of the AIs. At any rate, he seemed to be impressed with that, assessment that I made, and so there's more information about that on my article, and I've quoted some of that on my website. Okay, so he also talked about, again, the raptors, and I said, what kind of AI do the raptors have? And he basically said the raptors, because they've aligned themselves with humans, and especially apparently the Americans, even against the British, it appears, applying pressure to make sure the British remain our partners, I guess you might say. And he said that the AI is very astute that the raptors have, and that it can be instrumental in battling with other AIs that threaten humanity. He talked about the Ashtar Command, the fact that they are a kind of Nordic race, and that their leader Ashtar has dark hair, unlike doesn't look like a normal Nordic. And he said there's something strange about Ashtar. He didn't elaborate. He did say that the Ashtar Command has a different agenda. He said the Pleiadians are also one of the races of Nordics. He said both groups have worked with us. He said the Brits have worked with various Nordic races and that they don't always align with Americans, but because they're vulnerable, they have to bow to the fact that raptors are strategically aligned with us. And he said that the Nordics are friendly again, but very self-serving. He said that Britain is under the kind of control to some degree of the Black Dragon Queen and has been taken over by a Luciferian group. He said that the Black Dragon Queen is obviously part of this group, and that when people say they're in service to the Queen, they often mean they're in service to the Black Dragon Queen, not the actual Queen of England. And he said that Titania, who is a woman that Mark knew, and I'm not sure what the relationship with her was, but she's someone, I guess, who's not alive anymore, or at least not here. And he said that she was also a black queen, but she was what's called a rounded queen, actually both black and white. And she was the former queen, and that she was the most dangerous because she was both black and white, meaning black magic versus white magic is what we're talking about here. And he said that the Black Queen has her agenda, and that in essence, according to her agenda, humans are basically sort of stratified, and that we should be reporting to the upper levels of the Illuminati and the globalists who serve to run the world, and all the other people are basically subservient to them. And that is her agenda, among other things. And he says she's located in Europe. Curtis LeMay, the general, his philosophy, again, was to nuke it before it becomes a problem. In essence, nuke them and ask questions later. He said, we have, back in the 1950s, humans distributed, this is quite an amazing piece of information, distributed nukes and other highly destructive weaponry hidden around the universe, and that they are secret weapons everywhere in space, and they would preempt any attempt to destroy humanity, and that the ETs know that the humans did this. So I asked him how he could get away with telling me this piece of information, and he basically says that because of plausible deniability, in essence, no one's going to believe him. And he said that they will basically say that no, they're not going to believe, a convict, and so on. So this piece of information is totally new. It's quite interesting, and I'm not sure why he's telling me this, but I think it's significant. Again, he talked about what is in essence mutually assured destruction, or MAD, and that it is a safeguard against destruction of humanity. He said that he believes China is run on the inside by a group of reptoids. And the reptoids, he said, have a communist government, and so do the Chinese. He said that the Illuminati are looking forward right now, starting in 2017, to having 10 years of Earth changes. They think that those Earth changes will close the stargates, or a lot of the stargates. And a lot of the battles that are going on in the Middle East, as I've said before on my interviews with him, he said were battles over controlling the stargates, which allow races to come and go freely. He said Fukushima, for example, closed about a quarter of the stargates in the Middle East, and he said there are still many key stargates in the Zagreb Mountains and between Iraq and Iran, and again, these are battled over. It is interesting to note that he is saying that, in other words, a hit on Fukushima caused the stargates in the Middle East to be affected. So this must have to do with ley lines and vortexes that are connected in the grid around the planet. So that's interesting. He talked about CERN and the death of this woman who was in the news not long ago. He said that what they are doing at CERN, again, is to open portals for the reptoids to allow them to bring in large equipment. He said the Satanists are working with them, and that this death was orchestrated by the Satanists. He said there is a good side and a bad side to the Illuminati, and that his father was on the light side of the Illuminati. He said the dark magician ritual sacrifice that happened in front of CERN was a demonstration of their sort of flagrant display of the satanic power. And I've got a link here on my site to the Daily Mail article about this, the death of the woman. And he said that CERN is contains the longest tunnel in Switzerland, and that's just a note is that Switzerland contains a massive tunnel system. He said that he believes that there really was a Christ, and that Christ and Mary were, in essence, witches of the white magic path. In other words, white Illuminati. He said Air Force and in Space Command and Navy Intelligence run the secret space program. He said within Syria and Mosul, the bombing that's taken place, all of what's going on, has to do with a war with the reptoids, and that the reptoids are building something in Mosul right now that would somehow force disclosure and their presence, knowledge of their presence on Earth. And that the U.S. secret space program is determined to stop them. He said they want to force disclosure, and because they believe that the humans will go crazy around the planet, that they will, riot and destroy things and go crazy in the streets, etc., and that this is something that they would benefit from. So this is going on right now, and you'll see a lot of key information happening in the news about Mosul. So that's really important information. Regarding the immigration and the displaced populations from the Middle East as a result of the wars going on there, he said there were 20 million displaced or missing people. And he says they have become part of what is in essence a feeding frenzy on the part of the reptoids and the greys, and that only 13 million made it to Europe alive. So that is a huge piece of information, and that should tell you something about what's going on with the battle for planet Earth. He again what I told you before, which I said earlier, which is that he is getting written directives on how to answer me. And it is true that he rarely hesitates when I ask him any questions. Obviously, his mind works very quickly, but he says sometimes he does struggle to figure out whether or not he's been told to tell me something or not when I get particularly close to with one of my questions. I asked Mark why he's still in prison, because it really astounds me with all his abilities and information. He's such a key player. And he, in essence, said that his influence and contacts in the universe would threaten the powers that be that are in charge right now, and that he is their enemy. He says that he could probably garner enough support to take them down, and they know that. And this is really the clearest statement he ever made about being in prison, which is interesting to me. And so, for what that's worth, he has many times said that he does report to Bobby Ray Inman, so that's also important. With regard to disclosure, he does believe humanity would go crazy if they were to find out the kinds of things, not only that I'm releasing now, like in mass, that they would, if they would pay attention, which they don't. He said they don't mind a slow trickle of information, which is what I'm doing. But what they don't want is for the mainstream humanity to wake up all at once, because what he calls dangerous secrets basically would create a threat to them and to the powers that be. In essence, humanity would no longer obey anyone, probably, but they would also, he said, if you just look at what's happened when they see, for example, a black man killed, the riots that go on, he said that's just a small scale of what would happen if they actually realized that, the truth about alien intervention on planet Earth and what's really going on. He doesn't think that there's going to be a real disclosure until the year 2030. And that's very interesting. China in World War III, he said, one thing that the militaries in U.S. and China have been doing is working on exercises to remove the threat of war between them. So that's like a positive thing going on behind the scenes. I told him about the Hennock prophecies, which is the Billy Meyer prophecy, in which we go to war with Iran, that U.S. is against Russia and China in that scenario, but that eventually Russia will change sides and unite with the U.S. against China. I ran that by him. He thinks that is conceivable. He was not aware of that prophecy. So it is significant, I think, that he does stress in this interview that a lot of ETs are not necessarily good or bad, but that they are motivated by self-interest. And if their agendas align with ours, they are friendly, and if they don't, they simply are enemies. So that is also significant. And that pretty much wraps up everything that I've gotten from him in this interview. So some very significant statements, some rather strong statements in certain areas that in the past were not quite emphasized as much. And it was a great interview. He was in great form, and it was wonderful to see him, and to see him in good spirits as well. So thanks for watching, and please stay tuned to further updates on Project Camelot. Goodbye.